The billionaire's
You
hand
have
was
the
still
most
extended across the
captivating
polished
eyes I've
bar
ever
when
seen.
James Carter said the word that would change everything. No. Victoria Sinclair had never been rejected. Not in business, not in life, and certainly not by a bartender working the graveyard shift in a downtown dive. Her perfectly manicured fingers hung in the air between them, her invitation to dinner dissolving into stunned silence. Around them, the bar continued its late-night rhythm, glasses clinking, conversations murmuring. But in that moment, the world narrowed to two people and one impossible word. Victoria's eyes flashed with something dangerous, wounded pride mixed with sudden, burning curiosity. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more weight than a shout. "You're making a mistake." James met her gaze without flinching, his tired eyes holding depths she hadn't expected. "Maybe," he said quietly, "but it's mine to make." 3 years later, James would stand in a graduation gown with Victoria beside him, wearing an engagement ring. Their blended family complete with Noah clutching both their hands. But that morning was 1.6 million minutes away. First, he had to learn how to say yes. The amber light above the bar cast long shadows across James Carter's hands as he dried the same glass for the third time, movements automatic after 7 years of muscle memory. It was 2:47 a.m. on a Thursday, that dead hour when the serious drinkers had gone home and only the insomniacs and the troubled remained. The Anchor Bar wasn't much to look at. Scuffed floors, vinyl booths with duct-taped tears, a jukebox that had been playing the same 12 songs since 1997, but it was steady work, and steady work was everything. James was 32 years old and looked older. The kind of tired that settles into a man's bones isn't about missed sleep. It's about years of carrying weight that never lightens. His dark hair needed cutting. His white shirt had been pressed that morning, but now showed the wear of a full shift, and his eyes held that particular weariness of someone who'd learned early that life doesn't negotiate. "Last call went out 20 minutes ago, Mr. Chen." James's words shaped themselves with the patience that comes from repetition. The old man hunched over the corner of the bar had been a welder for 40 years before his hands started shaking too much to hold a torch. Now he came here 3 nights a week to remember when those hands built things that mattered. "You're a good boy, James. Your mother raised you right." "She did her best." The words carried more weight than Chen could know. His mother had done more than her best. She'd given everything, worked 2 jobs after his father left, put him through school until the money ran out. Now, Ellen Carter lay in Meadowbrook Extended Care, her mind betraying her one system at a time, and the medical bills arrived with the reliability of a metronome. James was pulling out his phone to order Chen's ride when the door opened, bringing with it a gust of October wind and a woman who didn't belong. She moved like money. That was James's first thought. Not the showy nouveau riche kind that needed everyone to notice, but the deeper confidence of someone who'd never questioned whether a door would open. Her coat probably cost more than his car, though she wore it casually like it was nothing. Dark hair fell in precise waves past her shoulders, and her features were striking in that way that suggested both genetics and very expensive maintenance. But it was her eyes that caught him. Sharp, assessing, and at that moment scanning the room with the focus of someone used to evaluating everything for its worth. Victoria Sinclair had come to the Anchor on a whim, or what passed for a whim in her carefully structured life. Her driver had suggested a different route to avoid construction, and she'd glimpsed the neon sign through the window, an actual lighthouse rendered in blue and white tubes that flickered slightly. Something about it had seemed honest in a way her usual haunts weren't. She'd built Sinclair Industries from an inheritance of 30 million into an empire worth 3 billion in just under a decade. She was 29 years old and had been on the cover of Forbes twice. Men courted her with desperate creativity. Women wanted to be her or destroy her. sometimes both. She'd learned early that everyone wanted something, and the trick was figuring out what before they did. The bar was nearly empty. Just the old man nursing something amber, a couple in the back booth who looked like they were having the kind of quiet argument that had been going on for years, and the bartender. He was watching her, but not the way men usually did. No double take, no straightening of posture, no sudden awareness that someone important had entered his space. He simply noted her presence the way he might note the weather, acknowledged but not changed by it. Victoria approached the bar, settling onto a stool that squeaked slightly. Up close, the bartender was younger than she'd first thought, though he had the kind of face that life had already written on. Strong jaw, straight nose, and eyes that seemed to look through rather than at things. "What can I get you?" His voice was even, professional, with a slight rasp that suggested too many late nights and not enough rest. "What do you recommend?" She was used to turning the question back, seeing how people handled the small test. "Depends on what you're looking for." He set down the glass he'd been drying, giving her his full attention in a way that was somehow both polite and impersonal. "Something to celebrate? Something to forget, or something to pass the time?" The question surprised her with its perception. "When you put it that way, I suppose I'm passing the time." "Then you want the local whiskey." He reached for a bottle with a worn label. "It's not fancy, but it's honest. Made about 50 miles from here by a guy who refuses to sell to the big distributors." He poured 2 fingers into a glass without asking if she wanted ice, somehow knowing she wouldn't. The gesture spoke of someone who paid attention, who noticed things. Victoria sipped. The whiskey was rough but good, with a warmth that spread genuine rather than affected. "You're right, it's honest. Honesty's underrated." He said it simply, like he was commenting on the weather, but something in his tone suggested he'd earned the right to that opinion. They fell into conversation the way strangers sometimes do at late hours, when the world shrinks down to a small circle of light and nothing outside it seems entirely real. She learned he worked nights so he could take morning classes, law, though he said it like he was admitting to a secret vice. He learned she worked in business development, which was technically true, though comically understated. What surprised Victoria was how easily they talked. Usually, conversations with strangers fell into predictable patterns. People either recognized her and became performative, or didn't recognize her and underestimated her. But James Carter did neither. He listened when she talked, responded with thoughts instead of platitudes, and somehow made her forget she was a billionaire sitting in a dive bar at 3 in the morning. "You married?" She noted the absence of a ring, knowing that didn't always mean anything. "No." Something flickered across his face, not pain exactly, but the shadow of old pain. "Almost was once, long time ago." "What happened?" "She wanted certainty, stability, things I couldn't offer." He said it without bitterness, just stating facts. "I was 23, working 2 jobs, taking care of my mother. I couldn't promise her the life she deserved, and she was smart enough to find someone who could." "Do you regret it?" He considered the question seriously, wiping down the bar in slow circles. "I regret that I couldn't be what she needed. But no, I don't regret that she left. She's happy now. 2 kids, house in the suburbs. She made the right choice." The answer revealed more than he probably intended. Here was a man who'd learned to accept the limits of his own life without resentment, who could genuinely wish happiness for someone who'd walked away. "What about you?" James asked. "Someone like you. I'd guess you have to beat them off with a stick." "Someone like me? Smart, beautiful, clearly successful." He said it matter-of-factly, the way he might comment that it was raining. "I'd bet you have plenty of options." "Options aren't the same as choices." The words came out more honestly than she'd intended. Most people who ask me out are interested in what I have, not who I am. That sounds lonely. The simple empathy in his voice caught her off guard. Not pity, not empty sympathy, just recognition. It is, she admitted, though the confession felt dangerous. Though I'm not supposed to say that out loud. Successful women aren't allowed to be lonely. We're supposed to be too busy being powerful. That's garbage. He said it with such casual certainty that she laughed. A real laugh that surprised them both. They talked for another hour. He told her about his son, Noah, who was 7 years old and obsessed with dinosaurs and believed his father knew everything about everything. His voice softened when he spoke about the boy, carrying the kind of love that doesn't need declaration. His mother? Victoria asked carefully. James's jaw tightened slightly, the only sign of anger he'd shown. Couldn't handle the reality of having a kid. The words came out clipped. Left when he was 6 months old, signed over custody, sends money sometimes. He asks about her less now. That must be hard. The hard part is watching him pretend it doesn't hurt. James met her eyes, and she saw something in them that made her chest tighten. The fierce, helpless love of a parent who can't protect their child from everything. But we manage. We have each other. Victoria found herself telling him things she rarely shared, about her father who'd built Sinclair Industries and then died of a heart attack at 52, leaving her an empire she'd been too young to handle, about the pressure of proving herself, of fighting off board members who thought a 23-year-old woman couldn't possibly fill her father's shoes, about the loneliness of success, where every relationship seemed transactional, every conversation weighted with unspoken agendas. You ever just want to walk away from it? James asked. Start over somewhere where nobody knows your name? Every day. She finished her whiskey, feeling the warmth settle. But then what? I've spent 10 years building something that matters, proving I'm more than my father's daughter. Walking away would mean all of that was for nothing. Or it would mean you did it, proved what you needed to prove. And now you're free to choose what comes next. The perspective shift was so simple it almost hurt. When did you get so wise? I'm not wise. He smiled, and it transformed his tired face into something younger, more open. I just don't have the luxury of complicated philosophy. When you're barely keeping your head above water, you learn to focus on what actually matters. It was nearly 4:30 when Victoria glanced at her phone and saw the 17 missed calls from her assistant. The real world was calling, demanding her attention with the insistence of responsibility. I should go, she said reluctantly, though she made no move to stand. Probably. James started collecting empty glasses, his movements efficient and practiced. Victoria watched him work for a moment, this man who'd somehow made her forget herself for a few hours. She pulled out a business card, real business card stock with embossed lettering, the kind that cost $6 each, and set it on the bar. I'd like to see you again. Dinner, somewhere nicer than this. James picked up the card, his thumb running over the raised letters. She watched his face change as he read. The slight widening of eyes, the almost imperceptible shift in posture as pieces clicked into place. Victoria Sinclair, CEO. Sinclair Industries, the woman who'd been on the cover of Fortune last month. $3 billion, 29 years old. I appreciate the offer, he said carefully, setting the card back down between them like he was returning something precious and dangerous. But I'm going to have to say no. The rejection hit her like cold water. Victoria had forgotten what this felt like, the sting of being turned down, the confusion of not getting what she wanted. Why? Because I don't date customers. It was such an obvious excuse that it was almost insulting. That's not the real reason. He met her eyes, and she saw something in them that surprised her. respect mixed with something that might have been regret. The real reason is that I know how this story goes. Woman like you, man like me, it doesn't end well. You get bored, I get hurt, and my son watches his father be a fool. So I'm saving us both the trouble. You're making assumptions. Her voice came out sharper than intended, wounded pride bleeding through. I'm making observations. He wasn't unkind, but he wasn't yielding either. You came in here looking for something different, something real. And I am different. I'm not trying to impress you. I'm not after anything you have. That's interesting to you right now. But interesting doesn't last. Eventually you'll remember you can have dinner with anyone in the city, and I'll remember I'm working 3 jobs to keep my head above water. Reality catches up. So you're protecting yourself. I'm protecting my son. The distinction mattered to him, she could tell. He's already lost one parent who couldn't handle real life. I won't let him get attached to someone who's going to disappear when the novelty wears off. Victoria stood, pulling her coat around her shoulders with movements that were a little too precise, a little too controlled. You're wrong about me. Maybe? He said it gently, without malice. But I can't afford to find out. She walked to the door, her heels clicking on the worn floor. At the threshold, she stopped and turned back. For what it's worth, James Carter, I think you just made the biggest mistake of your life. Maybe, he repeated, and his slight smile carried something like sadness. But it's mine to make. The door closed behind her, and James stood alone in the bar, the business card still sitting on the counter like evidence of something that had almost happened. He picked it up, turned it over in his hands, and then, after a long moment, slipped it into his pocket instead of the trash. Outside, Victoria sat in the back of her waiting car, her driver pretending not to notice the expression on her face. She pulled out her phone, opening the text thread with her best friend and board member, Diana Marsh. Just got rejected by a bartender. The response came immediately. Is he blind? Victoria wrote back, staring at her reflection in the dark window. No, he's careful, and he thinks I'm going to break his heart. Diana's reply. Are you? The question sat on the screen unanswered. Victoria thought about James Carter, his tired eyes and careful hands, the way he'd listened like her words mattered, the fierce love in his voice when he spoke about his son. She thought about how he'd turned her down not because he wasn't interested, but because he was protecting something more important than attraction. I don't know, she finally replied, but I'm going to find out. She made a decision then, one that had nothing to do with business strategy or calculated risk. 5 minutes, that's all it would take. 5 minutes of genuine interest before James Carter got bored or overwhelmed or realized she was exactly what he expected. 5 minutes before the differences between their worlds became too much and he walked away like everyone eventually did. She'd give him 5 minutes. And if he stayed longer, if he somehow lasted past that initial flash of curiosity and into something real, well, then maybe she'd been wrong about what was possible. It became a private bet with herself, the kind of challenge Victoria thrived on. 5 minutes of her real attention, her genuine self, before he proved her right and disappeared like everyone else who claimed they wanted real. What Victoria didn't know, what she couldn't know sitting in the back of that car at 4:45 in the morning, was that James Carter wasn't like everyone else. He was a man who'd spent years learning that the things worth having were the things worth fighting for, worth waiting for, worth protecting, even when protection looked like pushing away what you wanted most. The bet was made. The game had begun, and neither of them had any idea how it would change. Everything. The next night, James arrived at the Anchor to find a single red rose lying across his station, still fresh with morning dew. No note, no card, just the flower and the faint scent of expensive perfume lingering in the air. Leon Hayes, the day bartender, caught his expression and grinned. The man was 45, built like he'd played linebacker in college, with salt and pepper hair and the easy confidence of someone who'd seen everything twice. "You holding out on me, Carter? Some lady came in around noon, wouldn't give her name. Just left that and said you'd know who it was from." James picked up the rose carefully, thorns and all. He should throw it away, should ignore it, ignore her, go back to the safe simplicity of his carefully controlled life. Instead, he found himself pressing the rose between the pages of his law textbook when he got home that morning, preserving it like it meant something. Victoria, for her part, wasn't used to patience. She'd built an empire by seeing what she wanted and taking it, by moving faster than the competition, by never giving anyone time to tell her no. But something about James's rejection had lodged itself under her skin like a splinter. Not painful exactly, but impossible to ignore. She found herself thinking about him at odd moments. During board meetings, she'd remember the way he'd called her out on feeling lonely, the casual certainty that had somehow given her permission to be honest. While reviewing acquisition proposals, she'd recall how he'd described his son, the fierce protectiveness in every word. At charity galas, where men in expensive suits tried to impress her with their portfolios and their pedigrees, she'd think about a man in a white shirt who'd turned her down because he couldn't afford to be wrong. Diana found her distracted during their weekly dinner, her attention drifting to her phone every few minutes. "You're checking to see if he called," Diana observed, cutting into her perfectly prepared salmon. "I gave him my card, standard business practice." Victoria said it too quickly, too defensively. Mm-hmm. And the rose you had delivered?" "I don't know what you're talking about." Diana set down her fork, her expression shifting from amused to serious. "I've known you since Harvard. I've watched you close billion-dollar deals without blinking. I've never seen you chase someone who said no." "I'm not chasing him." "Then what are you doing?" Victoria was quiet for a long moment, swirling wine in her glass and watching the light catch it. "Do you remember what you said when I took over Sinclair Industries? When the board was trying to force me out and every newspaper was questioning whether I could possibly fill my father's shoes? I said you were the smartest person I knew and they were fools to doubt you. You said something else too. You said that being right gets lonely when everyone's rooting for you to fail." Victoria met her friend's eyes. "That bartender, James, he looked at me like I was just a person, not a success story, not a threat, not an opportunity, just a woman sitting in a bar at 3 in the morning. Do you know how long it's been since someone saw me like that?" "So, you're interested in him because he doesn't care about your money. I'm interested in him because he cares about more important things. His son, his mother, keeping his promises even when they cost him." Victoria's voice softened. "He turned me down to protect his kid from getting hurt. When was the last time someone in my life chose integrity over opportunity?" Diana reached across the table, squeezing her friend's hand. "Just be careful. Men who've been hurt before don't trust easy. And when they do trust, they go all in. If you're not serious about this, if you're just intrigued by the novelty of someone saying no, walk away now before anyone gets damaged. And if I am serious, then I hope he's worth it." Diana smiled, but concern lingered in her eyes. "And I hope you're ready for what it means to be with someone who has nothing to lose by walking away." The warning settled in Victoria's chest, both sobering and challenging. She was Victoria Sinclair, a woman who'd built an empire before 30. She didn't back down from challenges. She didn't quit when things got complicated. But she also didn't chase men who didn't want to be caught. Until now. A week passed, then 2. The rose remained pressed in James's textbook, a secret he didn't examine too closely. He told himself he was being smart, protecting Noah, keeping his life uncomplicated. He told himself a lot of things that would have been more convincing if he could stop thinking about the way Victoria Sinclair had looked in the dim bar light, the honesty in her voice when she'd admitted to being lonely. Noah noticed his distraction during their Saturday morning ritual, pancakes shaped like dinosaurs, a tradition they'd started when his son was 3. "Dad." Noah looked up from his Triceratops pancake, his expression serious in the way 7-year-olds get when they're trying to understand adult mysteries. "Are you sad?" "No, buddy. Why would you think that? You keep staring at stuff without seeing it. That's what you do when you're worried about Grandma." James's heart constricted. His son was too young to be that perceptive, too young to carry worry about whether his father was okay. "I'm not sad, just thinking about some stuff from work." "Is it about the pretty lady?" The question froze James mid-flip. "What pretty lady?" "The one who came to the bar last week. Mr. Leon told me when I went to visit. He said she must have been really pretty because you looked different after she left." Noah's expression turned hopeful in a way that hurt. "Is she going to be my mom?" And there it was. The reason James had turned Victoria down, crystallized in his son's eager face. Noah wanted a mother with the desperate hope of a child who'd learned too young that mothers could leave. He wanted it badly enough that any woman entering their life would immediately become a potential answer to that hole in his world. "No, Noah." James sat down next to his son, abandoning the pancakes. "She's not going to be anybody's mom. She was just a customer at the bar." "But Mr. Leon said—" "Mr. Leon talks too much." James softened the words with a gentle ruffle of Noah's hair. "Listen to me. It's just you and me, okay? Same as always. That's not going to change. But what if you met someone nice? Someone who liked dinosaurs and didn't mind that we only have one bathroom?" Noah's voice carried the careful hope of a child who'd learned to ask for things quietly, expecting nothing. "Then I'd make sure she was really nice and really liked you before I even thought about anything else." James pulled his son close, breathing in the scent of syrup and shampoo. "But you don't worry about that. Your job is to be 7 years old and love dinosaurs. My job is to take care of us. Deal?" "Deal." Noah hugged him back, fierce and trusting. But later, after Noah had gone to bed and the apartment was quiet except for the hum of old pipes and distant traffic, James found himself pulling out Victoria's business card. He didn't call. He wasn't ready to cross that line, wasn't ready to risk what a phone call might mean. But he looked at it, running his thumb over the embossed letters the same way he had that first night. Victoria Sinclair, CEO, Sinclair Industries. A woman so far out of his league they weren't even playing the same sport. And yet he remembered the loneliness in her voice, the way she'd admitted to feeling trapped by her own success. He remembered how she'd listened to his stories about Noah without that glazed look people got when parents talked about their kids. He remembered thinking, just for a moment, that maybe he'd misjudged her. Then he remembered his son asking if she was going to be his mother, and he put the card away. Some risks weren't worth taking. Some chances cost too much. He told himself that for 3 more days, right up until Victoria Sinclair walked back into the Anchor Bar. She came alone this time, dressed down in jeans and a sweater that probably still cost more than his rent but looked almost normal. It was a Tuesday night, the bar half full with regulars who barely glanced up when she entered. She took the same stool as before, folding her hands on the bar and waiting for him to acknowledge her. James finished serving another customer before approaching, his expression carefully neutral. "Whiskey, please." She watched him pour, noting the economy of his movements, the efficiency of someone who'd learned to waste nothing, not time, not energy, not words. He set the glass in front of her and moved to step away, but she spoke before he could retreat. "I'm not here to make you uncomfortable." "Could have fooled me." but there was no heat in it, just weary curiosity. "I've been thinking about what you said, about how this story goes, how it ends." She lifted the glass but didn't drink, just held it like a prop. "You're probably right. Statistically, logically, based on every similar situation in human history, you're probably right." "Okay. But here's the thing about statistics and logic and history. They're backwards looking. They tell you what already happened, not what could happen." She finally met his eyes, and he saw something in them that looked like genuine uncertainty. "I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm not even asking you to like me. I'm asking you to have dinner with me. One meal. No expectations, no obligations. Just two people eating food and talking." He studied her, looking for the angle, the hidden cost, the catch that always came with offers that seemed too good. "And if I have a horrible time, then you never have to see me again. If I turn out to be everything you expected, shallow, bored, using you as a curiosity, you get to say I told you so, and we both move on. And if neither of those things happens, then maybe we have a second dinner, or maybe we don't, but at least we'll know instead of guessing." James was quiet for a long moment, the bar noise washing over them like white noise. He thought about Noah asking if Victoria would be his mom. He thought about the rose pressed in his textbook. He thought about how tired he was of being careful all the time. One dinner. My night off is Friday. Somewhere casual, nowhere too expensive, and I pay for my own meal. Victoria's smile was luminous, transforming her face into something beyond beautiful, something joyful and real and almost vulnerable. "Deal. Except for the paying part. You pick the place, I'll pick up the check. That's non-negotiable." "Victoria." "It's just money, James, and I have more of it than I could spend in 3 lifetimes. Let me buy you dinner without it meaning anything except that I asked and I can afford it. Please." The please did it. The recognition that she was asking, not assuming, not leveraging power, but offering something simple and human. "Okay, but nothing fancy. There's an Italian place near campus, family-owned, real food. Meet me there at 7. "I'll be there." She finished her whiskey, set cash on the bar that was twice what she owed, and stood to leave. At the door, she paused. "James?" "Yeah?" "Thank you for saying yes." Then she was gone, leaving him standing behind the bar with the certain knowledge that he'd just made either the best or worst decision of his life. Leon appeared from the back room, grinning like he'd won the lottery. "Please tell me that was her. Please tell me you didn't just turn down Victoria Sinclair again." "I didn't turn her down. We're having dinner Friday." "You lucky bastard." Or the dumbest man alive. Jury's still out. But as he worked through the rest of his shift, James found himself counting the days until Friday with something that felt dangerously close to anticipation. He told himself it was just dinner, just 2 hours, just a chance to prove they had nothing in common so he could stop wondering. He told himself a lot of things that would have been more convincing if his hands weren't shaking slightly when he pulled out his phone and added "Dinner, Victoria" to his calendar. 5 minutes, she'd told herself. She'd give him 5 minutes of genuine attention before he got bored or overwhelmed or proved her right about what happened when different worlds tried to collide. What neither of them knew yet was that 5 minutes had already passed. They'd blown past it that first night at the bar, in the honesty of their conversation and the recognition of something rare passing between them. The bet was already lost. They just hadn't realized it yet. Friday arrived with the kind of autumn weather that makes everything feel possible. Crisp air, golden light, leaves the color of fire falling like slow promises. James spent an embarrassing amount of time deciding what to wear, finally settling on dark jeans and a button-down shirt that Noah solemnly approved of. "You look handsome, Dad." His son inspected him with 7-year-old gravitas. "Is this for the pretty lady?" "It's just dinner with a friend, buddy." Mom used to say that people who are just friends don't get nervous about what they wear. Noah said it innocently, repeating something he'd overheard years ago, but the words landed heavy. James knelt down, meeting his son's eyes. "You're too smart for your own good. You know that?" "That's what Grandma says." Noah hugged him spontaneously, fierce and quick. "Have fun, Dad. You deserve fun." The simple blessing from his 7-year-old nearly undid him. James held on an extra moment, breathing in the scent of his son's shampoo and the indefinable sweetness of childhood, reminding himself why he was careful, why he protected what mattered, why some risks couldn't be taken lightly. Mrs. Chen from down the hall had agreed to watch Noah for the evening, her grandmotherly eyes twinkling with knowing approval when James explained he had plans. He escaped before she could ask too many questions. Tony's Italian kitchen had been serving authentic food for 40 years, run by the same family, occupying the same corner with the same red-checkered tablecloths and the same smell of garlic and basil that had become inseparable from the space itself. James had discovered it during his first year of night school, and the owner's grandson Marco had become something close to a friend. He arrived 15 minutes early, habit and nervousness combining into uncharacteristic punctuality. Marco spotted him from behind the host stand and grinned. "James, you finally bringing a date to my restaurant? I thought this day would never come." "It's just dinner, Marco. Don't make a thing." "Everything's a thing when you never do anything." Marco grabbed menus with flourish. "I'm putting you in the back corner, the table by the window. Very romantic." "Marco, trust me, my friend. You want romantic." James let himself be led to the table, trying not to think about whether he wanted romantic or not. The corner was nice, quiet, lit by the amber glow of streetlights through the window, far enough from other diners to allow for private conversation. He sat facing the door out of old habit, watching customers come and go, nursing the water Marco had poured with exaggerated ceremony. Victoria arrived exactly at 7, and James's first thought was that she'd listened. She wore jeans and a simple green sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, minimal makeup. She'd made herself almost ordinary, and the effort touched him more than any expensive dress could have. She spotted him and smiled, and that smile did something complicated to his chest. Equal parts terror and possibility. "Hi." She slid into the chair across from him. "I wasn't sure you'd actually show up." "I wasn't sure either," he admitted, and the honesty made her laugh. "At least we're both uncertain together. That's something." They ordered. She took his recommendation on the pasta, he suggested the wine, and suddenly they were just two people having dinner instead of a CEO and a bartender trying to bridge impossible distance. The conversation flowed easier than it should have, natural and unforced, covering everything and nothing. She told him about growing up as an only child with a father who built empires and expected perfection, about the pressure of inheriting more than money, inheriting expectations, assumptions, a legacy that didn't leave room for failure. He told her about his own father, a man who'd promised to stay and left instead, teaching young James that words meant nothing if actions didn't back them up. "Is that why you're so careful?" Victoria asked, twirling pasta on her fork with the kind of focus that suggested the question mattered. "Because you learned early that people leave?" "Maybe." James considered it, appreciated that she asked instead of assumed. "Or maybe I'm careful because I learned what it costs when they do. My mother worked herself half to death after he left. I watched her choose between rent and food, between pride and asking for help. I won't do that to Noah. I won't let him wonder if his father's going to stay." "So you stay." "So I stay." He said it simply, a fact as fundamental as gravity. "That's admirable." She meant it, he could tell. And terrifying for anyone trying to get close to you, because they know if they leave, there'll be another person who hurt you and your son. The stakes are never just about the two of you. The perception caught him off guard. She'd seen something he'd barely articulated to himself. Is that what you're trying to do? Get close? I don't know yet. She met his eyes, and her honesty was disarming. I'm trying to figure out if there's something here worth exploring. If you're the kind of person who'd be worth the complication. And? Jury's still out. But I'm leaning yes. They talked through dinner and into dessert. Cheesecake that Marco insisted they try, sharing the plate between them like the intimacy of it was already decided. She asked about his classes, genuinely interested in his studies on contract law and constitutional precedent. He asked about Sinclair Industries, and she explained her latest acquisition, a struggling green energy company she was rebuilding from the ground up, with a passion that made her beautiful in an entirely new way. You really love it, he observed. The work, not just the success. I love building things, taking something broken and making it better, stronger. There's satisfaction in that. She paused, considering. Is that what you want from law? To build things? To protect things, actually. To make sure people like my mother have someone who fights for them when the system tries to grind them down. He said it with quiet conviction. Rich people have entire firms on retainer. Poor people have overworked public defenders and a system that assumes they're guilty. I want to balance that scale, even just a little. Victoria was quiet for a moment, something shifting in her expression. You know what's funny? I went into business to build an empire. You're going into law to make sure empires don't crush people. We're almost opposites. Almost? He smiled. Except you're using your empire to build green energy and create jobs. Maybe we're not as opposite as we look. The night stretched on, neither of them in a hurry for it to end. They talked about books and movies, discovered a shared love of old noir films and a mutual hatred of cilantro. She told him about the pressure of constant visibility, how exhausting it was to have every decision scrutinized. He told her about the quiet satisfaction of small victories, Noah's good report card, his mother's rare lucid days, the regular who'd just celebrated 5 years sober. Your life is rich, Victoria said eventually, and it wasn't condescending or pitying, just observation. Not in money, but in meaning. Everything you do matters to someone. Everything you do matters to thousands of people. Your employees, their families, the communities where you build. That's not nothing. No, but it's abstract. Numbers on a spreadsheet, metrics in a quarterly report. When was the last time I knew I made a real difference in someone's actual life? She looked down at her empty wine glass. I built an empire, James, but sometimes I wonder if I built anything that matters. You helped fund the clinic where my mother gets her care. Sinclair Foundation grant 3 years ago. That matters. He said it quietly, watching recognition dawn on her face. Your money paid for the nurse who sits with her when she's confused, the medication that keeps her comfortable. You might not see it, but trust me, it matters. Her eyes went bright with emotion. She quickly blinked away. I didn't know that. Why would you? You've probably funded hundreds of clinics. He reached across the table, a gesture that surprised them both, his hand covering hers. But that's my point. You're doing things that matter. You're just too busy building to notice the impact. They stayed like that for a moment, hands touching across the table in Tony's back corner, while around them, the restaurant carried on its Friday night rhythm. It was a small moment, barely significant, but it felt like something shifting, like the distance between their worlds narrowing just slightly. Marco appeared to clear their plates, his knowing smile both irritating and comforting. Can I interest you in coffee, or perhaps you'd like to just sit and talk all night? I don't close for another hour, and you two seem occupied. Coffee sounds good, Victoria said, not breaking eye contact with James. If that's okay. Coffee's good. They talked for another hour, covering the comfortable and uncomfortable with equal honesty. She admitted her last relationship had ended because she'd worked through their anniversary dinner without noticing. He admitted he sometimes used Noah as an excuse to avoid risking anything personal. She confessed to being scared of ending up alone with nothing but her bank account for company. He confessed to being terrified that anyone who got close would eventually decide he wasn't worth the struggle. "You know what I think?" Victoria said eventually, as they stood to leave, the restaurant empty now except for Marco pretending not to eavesdrop. "I think we're both scared of the same thing." "What's that?" "That we might actually be worth the risk." They walked out together into the October night, the air colder now, carrying the promise of winter. James's car was parked in the opposite direction from where Victoria's driver waited, creating a natural moment of decision. "Thank you," she said, "for saying yes, for giving this a chance. Thank you for asking twice, for not taking no for an answer, even when it would have been easier. Is this where I'm supposed to ask if I'll see you again?" There was vulnerability in the question, rare for someone as powerful as Victoria Sinclair. "Would you want to?" "Yes." No hesitation, no coyness. "I'd like that very much." "Then I guess you'll see me again." He smiled, feeling something ease in his chest, not all the caution, not all the protection, but enough to breathe deeper. "But next time, I'm paying. We'll negotiate." She stepped closer, and for a moment he thought she might kiss him. Instead, she just touched his arm, a brief contact that somehow felt more intimate than a kiss might have been. "Good night, James Carter." "Good night, Victoria Sinclair." He watched her walk to her car, watched the driver open her door with practiced precision, watched her disappear into the back seat. Only when the car had pulled away did he turn toward his own vehicle, his thoughts a complicated tangle of hope and fear and possibility. He'd given her one dinner. That was all he'd promised. One meal, one evening, one chance to prove they had nothing in common. Instead, he'd found someone who understood loneliness and pressure, who didn't flinch from his struggles or try to fix everything with money, who saw him as a whole person instead of a project or a curiosity. 5 minutes, she'd told herself. Just 5 minutes before he proved her right about how these things ended. But they'd spent 3 hours together, and neither of them had gotten bored, overwhelmed, or scared off by the reality of who they were. The 5 minutes were up, the bet was lost, and neither of them had any idea what came next except that they wanted to find out. 3 weeks passed in a strange suspension between ordinary life and anticipation. James worked his shifts, attended classes, helped Noah with homework, visited his mother in the facility where she sometimes knew him and sometimes didn't. But underneath the routine ran a current of something new, something that made even mundane moments feel lighter. Victoria texted him throughout the week. Nothing demanding or excessive, just small check-ins that acknowledged she was thinking about him. A photo of her coffee with the caption, "Nowhere near as good as bar coffee." A question about whether his contracts exam went well. A random update that she'd convinced her board to increase employee healthcare coverage, followed by, "Thought you'd appreciate that." He found himself looking forward to her messages, the small interruptions that connected their separate worlds. He'd never been much of a texter. His phone was functional, a tool rather than an appendix. But with Victoria, it felt different, natural, like carrying on a conversation that had started in the bar and hadn't ended yet. Their second dinner happened at a steakhouse, she suggested, the kind of place with leather booths and soft lighting that managed to be nice without being pretentious. She arrived before him, already seated at a corner table with water waiting. "You're early," James said, sliding into the booth across from her. "I was nervous." She said it with a slight smile that suggested she wasn't used to admitting such things. "Kept thinking you might change your mind." "I almost did, about 6 times between Friday and today." He picked up the menu, appreciating that she'd chosen a place with reasonable prices. "Noah asked me this morning if you were my girlfriend. I didn't know what to tell him." "What did you say?" That you were a friend I was getting to know. He wanted to know if that meant you'd come over for dinosaur movie night. James watched her face for signs of panic or retreat. I told him probably not. Why probably not? There was genuine curiosity in the question, not offense. Because I don't introduce people to my son unless I know they're staying, and I don't know that yet. He met her eyes, needing her to understand. That's not a criticism. It's just reality. We've had 2 dinners. That doesn't mean anything except we enjoyed each other's company twice. Fair enough. She took a breadstick, breaking it carefully. For what it's worth, I think about him. Your son. I wonder what he's like, whether he has your eyes, if he's as stubborn as you are. He's more stubborn. Gets it from his grandmother. James softened despite himself. He's smart, curious about everything. Wants to be a paleontologist this week. Last week it was an astronaut. The week before that, a chef who only makes breakfast food. Victoria laughed, the sound genuine and unguarded. 7-year-olds contain multitudes. They do. It's exhausting and amazing in equal measure. He paused, then decided honesty was the only path forward. You should know, if this goes anywhere, if we become something real, Noah comes first. Always. That's not negotiable. I wouldn't respect you if it was any other way. She said it with such simple certainty that something in his chest loosened. James, I'm not asking to compete with your son. I'm asking to get to know you. If that eventually includes meeting him, great. If it doesn't work out before we get there, then we'll both move on. But right now, in this moment, can we just be 2 people having dinner without mapping out the entire future? The perspective shift was both relief and challenge. She was right that he was catastrophizing, planning for disaster before anything had really begun. But she also didn't understand that for him, every choice about his personal life was about disaster planning. One wrong decision, one person who hurt Noah or left without warning, could damage his son in ways that might take years to heal. I can try, he said finally. But fair warning, I'm not good at living in the moment. I'm always 3 steps ahead, looking for problems. Then I'll have to work harder to keep you present. She reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. Starting with this, what's the best thing that happened to you this week? The question was so unexpected, so deliberately focused on the positive, that it took him a moment to answer. Noah learned to tie his shoes. Finally. We'd been practicing for months, and Tuesday morning, he just did it. Perfect loops and everything. He was so proud he wore those shoes to bed that night. Victoria's smile transformed her face. That's beautiful. What about you? Best thing this week? This. She gestured between them. Sitting here, learning about shoe-tying victories, realizing that some things are worth being nervous about. They ordered dinner, steaks for both, medium rare, with sides they agreed to share because somewhere between Friday and today, they'd crossed into the kind of comfort where sharing food felt natural. The conversation flowed like a continuation rather than a new beginning, picking up threads from their last dinner and weaving them into something richer. She told him about a board meeting that morning, where she'd had to defend her decision to keep a barely profitable division open because it employed 300 people in a town with few other options. 2 board members had called it sentimental. She'd called it responsible capitalism and won the vote by 1. You could have just shut it down, James observed. Would have been easier, more profitable. Easier isn't always better, and profit isn't the only metric that matters. She said it with quiet conviction. My father taught me that. He used to say that any fool can make money by destroying things. It takes wisdom to build wealth that lifts people up. He sounds like he was a good man. He was brilliant and flawed, and I miss him every day. Her voice caught slightly. He had a heart attack in his office, alone, working late like always. They found him the next morning. I was in London closing a deal, being everything he'd trained me to be, and I wasn't there when it mattered. James heard the guilt beneath the words, the weight of choices that couldn't be unmade. You know it's not your fault, right? That him dying alone wasn't something you could have prevented by being psychic. Intellectually, yes, but grief doesn't care about logic. She took a breath, steadying herself. Sorry, that got heavy fast. Don't apologize. Heavy is real. I'd rather have heavy and honest than light and fake. He kept his hand where she could reach it if she needed, offering without insisting. My mother doesn't remember me most days now. The disease has taken so much that sometimes I visit and she thinks I'm my father. She smiles at me like I'm the man who left her and I have to pretend everything's fine because correcting her just upsets her. That's heavy too. How do you do it? Stay present with her when she's lost? I remember that she's still in there somewhere. The woman who taught me to read, who worked doubles so I could have school supplies, who never once made me feel like I was a burden, even when money was tight. She's still there, just buried. His voice roughened. So I sit with her and I tell her about Noah, and sometimes she calls me by my father's name and I answer to it because at least in that moment she's happy. Victoria's eyes were bright with unshed tears. You're a good son. I'm an exhausted son who's doing his best. He cleared his throat, needing to lighten the mood before they both drowned in sadness. But enough about heavy things. Tell me something ridiculous about being rich, something that would make me laugh at how weird your life is. She blinked, then laughed, grateful for the shift. Okay. Last month I had to fire my personal shopper because she kept buying me clothes in a size smaller than I wear. When I asked why, she said she was manifesting my ideal body and thought the motivation would help. You're kidding. I wish I was. She'd spent $30,000 on clothes I couldn't wear because she decided my ideal body was 2 sizes smaller than my actual body. Victoria shook her head, amused and exasperated. Rich people problems are so absurd sometimes. $30,000. James tried to wrap his mind around it. That's more than I make in a year. I know. And I'm aware of how ridiculous that sounds. She met his eyes, checking for judgment. Does it bother you? The money? Honestly? Sometimes. Not because I resent it, but because I can't quite comprehend it. You spent more on unwearable clothes than I'll spend on everything for the next year. That's hard to reconcile. He was quiet for a moment. But then I remember that you funded the clinic that helps my mother, that you're keeping 300 people employed because it's the right thing to do. And I think maybe the money matters less than what you do with it. That's generous of you. It's honest. There's a difference. He smiled slightly. Besides, if I'm going to get uncomfortable about wealth disparity, I should probably start with the entire economic system rather than one person who's trying to use her resources responsibly. Political and principled. I like it. She leaned back, studying him with open curiosity. Can I ask you something potentially offensive? That's a great start to a question. Do you want to be rich? Is that part of why you're going to law school, building towards something bigger? James considered the question seriously, appreciating that she'd asked directly. I want stability. I want to not worry about whether I can afford Noah's field trip or whether one unexpected expense will destroy our budget. I want to visit my mother without calculating whether I can afford the gas. He paused. But rich? Like you're rich? No, that's not my goal. Why not? Because I've learned that enough is a real number, not an endless pursuit. Enough to be comfortable, to give Noah opportunities, to help people who need it. That's what I want. More than that starts to cost things that matter more than money. He gestured around the restaurant. This right now. This is enough. Good food, good company, no stress about the bill because we're splitting it like adults. Adding zeros to my bank account wouldn't make this better. What if I told you I think about that sometimes, about what enough looks like? Victoria's voice dropped. I have $3 billion. I could stop working tomorrow and live comfortably for 10 lifetimes, but I keep building, keep expanding, keep chasing the next deal, and I don't know if it's ambition or addiction or just fear of stopping long enough to feel empty. What would you do if you stopped? I have no idea. And that's terrifying. She laughed, but it carried an edge of real fear. I've been working since I was 22. Building, acquiring, proving myself. If I stop being Victoria Sinclair, CEO, I don't know who Victoria Sinclair the person even is anymore. Then maybe that's something worth figuring out. He said it gently, without judgment. Not stopping forever, but maybe stopping long enough to remember what you're building toward instead of just building. They sat with that for a moment, the weight of unspoken possibilities hanging between them. Around them, the restaurant hummed with other conversations, other lives intersecting over shared meals. But in their corner, there was only this. Two people from different worlds trying to understand each other without maps or guarantees. The weeks accumulated like interest. 3 dinners became 5, 5 became 8. They fell into a rhythm that felt both inevitable and fragile. Victoria learned that James quoted entire scenes from movies he'd watched once years ago, that he made breakfast for dinner when he was too tired to think, that he'd secretly wanted to be a writer before life demanded more practical ambitions. James learned that Victoria was afraid of flying, despite traveling constantly for business, that she'd taken up painting during the pandemic and wasn't very good, but loved it anyway, that she cried at dog adoption commercials but maintained perfect composure during hostile board meetings. They were careful not to let their relationship bleed into the rest of their lives too quickly. James still hadn't introduced her to Noah, though his son had started asking more pointed questions about where Dad kept disappearing to twice a week. Victoria hadn't mentioned James to anyone except Diana, keeping him separate from the scrutiny and speculation that would inevitably come if her relationship became public knowledge. It felt sustainable, this private bubble they'd created. Until the morning, everything shifted. James was working an early shift at the campus coffee shop, a third job he'd picked up to cover an unexpected car repair, when his phone rang with a call from Meadowbrook Extended Care. His mother's doctor spoke in the careful tones reserved for bad news delivered gently. Pneumonia. Admitted to the hospital. Stable but serious. Could he come as soon as possible? He made it to County General in 20 minutes, his hands shaking on the steering wheel, his mind cataloging everything that needed to be rearranged. Classes, shifts, Noah's pickup from school. Ellen looked small in the hospital bed. Oxygen tubes and IV lines turning her into something fragile and temporary. She was sleeping, her breathing shallow but steady, and the doctor explained treatment plans and timelines with professional compassion that did nothing to ease the fear settling in James's chest. She'll need someone with her, at least for the first 48 hours. Family, if possible. I'll be here. The words came automatically, though his mind was already spinning through logistics. He'd have to call in sick to work, miss classes, figure out coverage for Noah. Mrs. Chen could help, but not indefinitely. He texted Victoria without thinking about it, his fingers moving before his brain could override. My mother's in the hospital. Pneumonia. I'm going to be here a while. Her response came within minutes. Which hospital? I'm coming. You don't have to do that. I know you're busy. I know. But I'm coming anyway. Send me the address. She arrived an hour later, still dressed in what was clearly a business suit, her hair pulled back severely, looking every inch the CEO except for the worry in her eyes. She found him in the waiting room during one of his mother's tests, sitting with cold coffee and the kind of exhaustion that comes from fear rather than sleeplessness. Hey, She slid into the chair beside him, her voice quiet. "How is she?" "Stable. They're running more tests." He couldn't quite look at her, afraid that meeting her eyes would break whatever composure he was maintaining. "You didn't have to come. I know you have meetings." "James." She waited until he looked at her. "Where else would I be?" The simple question undid something in his chest. He'd spent so long handling everything alone, being the strong one, the reliable one, the person everyone else leaned on. He'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone show up just because he needed them. "Thank you for being here. Always." She took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "Tell me what you need. What can I do?" "Nothing. Everything. I don't know." He rubbed his free hand over his face, trying to organize thoughts that kept scattering. "I need to pick up Noah from school in 3 hours. I need to cover my shifts at work. I need to not fall apart when my mother wakes up and doesn't remember who I am." Victoria was quiet for a moment, and he could almost see her brain working, organizing, solving problems, breaking impossible tasks into manageable pieces. "Okay, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to sit with your mother while you pick up Noah. Then you're both going to come back here, because she's his grandmother and he deserves to see her. I'll stay as long as you need backup." "Victoria, you can't just cancel your day. I own the company, James. I can do whatever I want." She said it without arrogance, just stating fact. "Besides, Diana's been telling me I work too much. This is me taking her advice." "What about your meetings, your obligations?" "I have a phone and a laptop. Anything urgent I can handle from here. Anything not urgent can wait." She squeezed his hand. "Let me help, please." He wanted to argue, wanted to maintain his independence, wanted to prove he could handle this alone the way he'd handled everything else. But he was tired. Bone-deep tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep and everything to do with years of carrying weight without relief. And Victoria was here, solid and certain, offering help without pity or judgment. "Okay, thank you." His mother woke 20 minutes later, groggy from medication but lucid. She looked at James with clear recognition that made his throat tight with relief. "You came?" Her voice was raspy from the oxygen. "Of course I came, Mom. Where else would I be?" He took her hand carefully, mindful of the IV. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck made of exhaustion." She tried to smile, but it came out weak. "Don't look so worried. I'm too stubborn to go anywhere yet." "Good, because Noah would never forgive me if something happened to his favorite grandmother. I'm his only grandmother." But the correction carried affection. Her eyes drifted to Victoria, standing respectfully near the door, and curiosity sharpened her expression despite the illness clouding her mind. "And who's this?" "Mom, this is Victoria. She's—" James paused, the label suddenly inadequate. "She's important to me." "A friend who shows up at hospitals." His mother's gaze was knowing, despite the medication. "Those are the best kind of friends." Victoria stepped forward, her corporate polish somehow softening into something warmer. "It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Carter. I've heard wonderful things about you." "Well, you can't believe all of them." His mother tried for levity but started coughing, a rattling sound that had the nurse appearing immediately to check vitals and adjust oxygen. James stepped back to give the medical staff room, and Victoria moved with him, a silent presence at his shoulder. When the nurse finally left with assurances that everything was stable, his mother was drifting back to sleep, and James found himself alone in the hallway with Victoria, his careful composure finally cracking. "I can't lose her. Not yet. Noah needs her. I need her. She's supposed to get better, supposed to have more time." Victoria pulled him into a hug without asking permission, and he let himself lean into her, let himself be held while fear and exhaustion leaked out in shaky breaths he wouldn't dignify by calling tears. She didn't offer empty reassurances or false promises. She just held him, solid and warm, until he could breathe normally again. "I'm sorry," he said eventually, pulling back and wiping his face. "I don't usually fall apart like that." "You're not falling apart. You're being human in an impossible situation." She kept one hand on his arm, grounding. "And you don't have to apologize for feeling things. I should be stronger than this." "Why? Because you're always the strong one? Because everyone depends on you, so you're not allowed to need support?" She said it gently but firmly. "That's not strength, James. That's just exhaustion wearing a brave mask." He picked up Noah from school, explaining about Grandma in careful terms that acknowledged the seriousness without terrifying a 7-year-old. Noah took it with the resilience of children who'd already learned that life didn't always cooperate with what you wanted. His main concern, whether they could visit her. They stopped home long enough for Noah to grab the drawing he'd made that morning, a dinosaur family complete with labels and careful coloring, then headed back to the hospital. Victoria was exactly where James had left her, laptop balanced on her knees, phone pressed to her ear as she conducted what sounded like a board meeting from a hospital chair. She held up one finger when she saw them, wrapping up with efficient authority before ending the call. "Sorry about that. Quarterly projections wait for no one." She stood, closing her laptop, and her attention shifted completely to Noah with an ease that surprised James. "You must be Noah. I'm Victoria." Noah, who'd been uncharacteristically shy, studied her with the serious assessment of a child deciding whether an adult was trustworthy. "You're the friend who came to help with Grandma." "That's right. Your dad was worried about her, and I wanted to make sure he wasn't alone." "That's nice." Noah considered this, then held out his drawing. "I made this for Grandma. Do you think she'll like it?" Victoria took the picture with appropriate reverence, examining it like it was fine art. "This is spectacular. Is that a whole family of stegosauri?" "That's the proper plural," Noah corrected automatically, clearly impressed she'd known. "And yes, that's the mom, dad, and 3 babies. I did research." "I can tell. The detail is impressive." She handed it back carefully. "She's going to love this." They went into his mother's room together, Noah climbing carefully onto the bed to show his grandmother the drawing. She woke enough to admire it properly, to tell him it was the best dinosaur family she'd ever seen, to make him promise to keep being good for his dad. Victoria hung back, giving them space, but staying close enough to help if needed. Watching her with his family, patient with Noah's chatter, gentle with his mother's frailty, supporting James without taking over, something shifted in his chest. This wasn't just attraction anymore. Wasn't just the excitement of new relationship. This was something deeper, something that looked dangerously like love taking root. They stayed until visiting hours ended, Noah falling asleep with his head on James's shoulder while Victoria handled work emails on her phone with one hand and held James's hand with the other. When a nurse finally suggested they go home and rest, promising to call if anything changed overnight, James felt the resistance of wanting to stay war with the exhaustion of knowing he needed sleep. "Come on," Victoria said quietly. "You need rest. She'll be here in the morning." They walked to the parking garage together, Noah heavy and warm against James's chest, dead to the world in the way only exhausted children can manage. At Victoria's car, he finally put his son down, the boy immediately clinging to his leg like a sleepy koala. "Thank you," James said, the words inadequate for everything she'd done today, for showing up, for staying, for being exactly what they needed, for making her happy, for showing her what real partnership looks like. She's different now, softer in the good ways, more willing to be vulnerable. That's because of you." "She's done the same for me," James replied honestly. "Taught me that accepting help doesn't make me weak, that letting someone in is brave instead of stupid. We saved each other, I think. Yeah, Diana smiled, her usual corporate polish cracking to show genuine warmth. You really did. After everyone left, after Noah had been put to bed with minimal protest and promises to discuss dog ownership more seriously, James and Victoria finally had a moment alone. They collapsed onto his worn couch together, exhausted and content in equal measure, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. You were quiet during the party, Victoria observed. What were you thinking about? How different everything is. How 3 years ago I was drowning in impossible logistics, working 3 jobs, barely sleeping, hardly keeping my head above water. He shifted to look at her properly. And now I'm here, graduated from law school. My mother's being cared for. Noah's thriving. And I have this, us, this family we've built. You built it. I just helped. No, we built it. That's the point. His voice carried conviction earned through struggle. I spent my whole adult life doing everything alone because I was scared of depending on anyone. You taught me that letting someone in doesn't make me weak. It makes me stronger. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, then, I need to tell you something. I was going to wait until after graduation, didn't want to distract you, but now seems right. Worry spiked through his contentment. Everything okay? Everything's better than okay. She sat up, turning to face him properly. I've been thinking a lot about what you said once, about how I keep building because I'm afraid to stop. Afraid to figure out who I am if Sinclair Industries doesn't define me. You were right, and I've been working with a therapist, figuring some things out. She took a breath. I'm stepping back from day-to-day operations at Sinclair Industries. Promoting Diana to CEO, staying on as board chair, but not running everything myself. I'll still be involved, still building things, but not at the expense of everything else. The announcement was shocking in its implications. That's huge. Are you sure? I'm sure. I've spent 10 years proving I could run my father's company. I succeeded. Grew it beyond what he built. Proved every doubter wrong. She smiled, a little nervous, a little excited. But I don't want to spend the next 10 years doing the same thing just because I'm afraid to try something different. I want time to figure out what else I care about. Time to be present instead of constantly working. Time to be a wife, and maybe, if it's something you want, eventually, a mother. The last word hit him like a physical force, carrying implications they'd danced around but never directly addressed. A mother? You mean? I mean, I've been thinking about it. About us. About Noah and how much I love being part of his life. About whether we might want to expand our family. She rushed on before he could respond. I know that's complicated. I know Noah has a mother, however absent she is. I'm not trying to replace Kelsey or pretend she doesn't exist. But I've been wondering if there might be room for more. Whether you'd want another child. Whether that's something we should think about. James cut her off by kissing her. Deep and desperate and full of every emotion he didn't have words for. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he pulled back enough to meet her eyes. Wait here. He stood up, disappeared into his bedroom, leaving Victoria sitting on the couch wondering what had just happened. He returned holding a small velvet box, his hands shaking slightly. Victoria froze. James knelt in front of her, right there in the middle of his small living room. I bought this 3 months ago. Been carrying it every day since, waiting for the right moment, trying to find perfect words. He opened the box, revealing a simple gold band with a modest diamond, not what she was used to, but something he'd chosen, paid for with money he'd earned. Victoria Sinclair, I love you. You've made me braver, made me better, made me believe I deserve good things instead of just surviving. I know this isn't what you're used to. I know you could buy yourself a bigger ring without thinking about it. But this is what I can offer. a ring I chose myself, paid for with money I earned, a promise that I'll keep showing up, keep trying, keep loving you even when it's hard. Will you marry me? Victoria's eyes filled with tears, her hands shaking as she reached for the box. Yes. God, yes. Of course, yes. You ridiculous, wonderful, infuriating man. Did you really think I'd say anything else? He took the ring from her trembling fingers, sliding it onto her left hand. It fit perfectly. The jeweler had measured exactly right. The simple band somehow looked exactly right on her elegant hand. I love you, she said, kissing him with the kind of intensity that suggested words weren't quite sufficient. I love you, and I can't wait to marry you, to build a life with you officially instead of just in practice. They kissed until breathing became necessary, until the emotion of the moment needed to settle before it consumed them completely. Finally, Victoria pulled back, smiling through tears. I love you, she said again, like she needed to say it twice to make it real. And I can't wait to marry you, to officially build this life we've already started. Me too, James whispered, holding her close. Me too. They held each other in the small living room, the television still playing some forgotten show, the remains of dinner still on the counter. It was ordinary and monumental all at once. Two people who'd found each other against impossible odds, choosing to build something permanent from the wreckage of their separate loneliness. Outside, the city hummed with its usual Friday night energy. But in that apartment, there was only this: a proposal accepted, a pregnancy shared, a future taking shape from the fragments of two broken people who'd learned how to be whole together. The 5-minute bet had been lost before it ever began. They'd exceeded it that first night at the bar, in the honesty of their conversation and the recognition of something rare passing between them. Now they were betting on forever, with all its complications and challenges, its joys and sorrows, its ordinary miracles and extraordinary grace. And for the first time in years, James Carter let himself believe that forever might actually be possible. 3 years can change everything or nothing, depending on what you're measuring. The calendar pages turned with relentless efficiency, marking time in seasons and milestones, in graduations and growth spurts, in moments both ordinary and extraordinary. But some things, the important things, remained constant. James Carter stood in his law school graduation gown, the fabric stiff and formal, feeling simultaneously proud and slightly ridiculous. The ceremony had ended 20 minutes ago, and he was surrounded by classmates taking photos and making plans for celebration dinners at restaurants he still couldn't quite afford without calculating the cost. His mother sat in her wheelchair nearby, having what the nurses called a good day, those increasingly rare moments when the fog lifted and Ellen Carter was fully present. Her eyes were bright with tears she kept brushing away. My son, the lawyer. She said it for the 3rd time, her voice trembling with emotion that was entirely clear despite the disease that usually clouded her mind. Your father would be so proud. I'm so proud. Thanks, Mom. James crouched beside her chair, taking her hand carefully. These moments of clarity were precious for their scarcity, gifts he'd learned not to take for granted. Couldn't have done it without you. All those years you worked to give me opportunities. This is because of you. No. She squeezed his hand with surprising strength. This is because of you. Because you're stubborn and good, and you never gave up, even when life gave you every reason. Her gaze drifted past him, focusing on something over his shoulder. And because you finally let someone help you carry the weight. James turned to find Victoria approaching, Noah's hand in hers, both of them grinning like they'd won something. His son had shot up in the past 3 years, all gangly limbs and permanent teeth where baby ones had been. He was 10 now, poised on the edge of adolescence, and the changes were simultaneously heartbreaking and beautiful. Dad! Noah launched himself at James with the enthusiasm of a kid who hadn't yet learned to be too cool for public affection. "You did it! You're officially a lawyer now." "Not quite officially until I pass the bar exam, buddy, but close enough." James caught his son, holding him tight, breathing in the moment. "Thanks for being here. Where else would we be?" Noah pulled back, suddenly serious. "This is important. We don't miss important things." The word "we" landed with particular weight, encompassing not just Noah and James, but the family they'd built together over 3 years of dinners and movie nights, museum visits, and homework help. Victoria had woven herself into the fabric of their lives through 1,000 small moments, becoming essential without ever trying to replace what had been lost. Victoria reached them, her smile warm and proud. She wore a dress that probably cost more than James's entire graduation wardrobe, but somehow made it look effortless. "Congratulations, counselor." She pulled him into a hug, Noah still clinging to his other side, forming the kind of tangle that had become familiar. "How does it feel?" "Surreal. Exhausting. Amazing." He pulled her closer with his free arm. "Thank you for being here. All of you." Ellen watched the 3 of them with an expression that mingled joy and something deeper, the knowledge of someone whose time was measured in moments rather than years. "You've built something good here." Her voice was soft but certain. "Something real. Don't take it for granted." The words carried the weight of someone who knew time was finite, who understood the disease would eventually steal more than just memory. But today she was here, fully present, witnessing her son's achievement. That was enough. They took photos together, the 4 of them creating documentation that would matter later when Ellen's mind had wandered too far to remember. Noah insisted on wearing James's graduation cap, tilting it at an absurd angle that made everyone laugh. Victoria organized them with efficient authority, making sure they captured every combination and angle. "Okay, now just James and his mom." She stepped back with Noah. "This is her moment, too." James posed with his mother, his arm around her thin shoulders, both of them smiling at the camera while something deeper passed between them. Gratitude and love, and the complicated grief of knowing these clear moments were becoming rarer. When the photos were done, Ellen reached up to touch his face, her eyes memorizing features she might not recognize tomorrow. "I'm so proud of you," she said quietly, just for him. "And I'm glad you found her. Glad you let yourself have something good instead of just surviving." "Me too, Mom. Me too." They took Ellen back to Meadowbrook, Noah chattering the entire drive about summer plans and whether they could finally get a dog now that Dad was done with school. Ellen drifted in and out of clarity, sometimes following the conversation, sometimes asking questions they'd already answered, but happy throughout. At the facility, the staff had decorated her room with a banner congratulating "Our lawyer's mom." Ellen beamed at it, already telling the nurses about her son even as the fog began creeping back. "I'll see you tomorrow, Mom." James kissed her forehead, knowing tomorrow she might not remember today, might not remember him. "Love you, baby." She patted his cheek, her eyes already distant. "Don't forget to pick up the dry cleaning." He hadn't lived with her in 14 years, but the instruction came from some pocket of memory that still held. James just nodded, tucking the blanket around her shoulders. "I won't forget. You rest now." In the hallway, Victoria waited with Noah, giving them privacy for goodbyes that grew harder each time. "She's getting worse, isn't she?" Noah's voice was small, carrying the fear of a child who'd already learned that people you love can disappear. James knelt down, meeting his son's eyes with the honesty he'd always promised. "Yeah, buddy. The disease is taking more each time. We're lucky when we get days like today, when she's really here with us. I don't want her to forget us. I know. Me neither. James pulled Noah close. But that's why we keep visiting, keep telling her stories, keep loving her even when she doesn't remember our names. Because somewhere in there she's still Grandma, and she knows she's loved. Noah nodded against his shoulder, accepting what couldn't be changed with the resilience children develop when life demands it. Victoria drove them to the small celebration James had planned, just close friends, cheap wine, and pizza from the place down the street. Nothing fancy, but real. Leon brought a cake shaped like a gavel that said, "Hammer out justice." Marcus from law school showed up with his girlfriend. Diana arrived with champagne that probably cost more than James's monthly rent, but she drank it from paper cups without complaint. Mrs. Chen came with cookies and a card that made James tear up with its simple sincerity. The apartment was too small for this many people, bodies pressed together in comfortable chaos, laughter and conversation filling every corner. Noah held court near the pizza boxes, explaining his latest science project to anyone who'd listen. Leon told increasingly embellished stories about James's bartending days. Diana pulled Victoria aside for an intense conversation that ended with both women hugging fiercely. James stood in his tiny kitchen, surveying the scene with the surreal satisfaction of having arrived somewhere he'd once thought impossible. 3 years ago, he'd been drowning in logistics, working multiple jobs, barely keeping his head above water. Now he had a law degree, manageable debt thanks to Victoria's help and his stubborn insistence on contributing, and a future that looked like something more than just survival. Leon appeared beside him, beer in hand, his expression unusually serious. "You did good, man. Remember when you first started at the bar? You were so tired you could barely see straight, grinding yourself down to nothing. Look at you now. Couldn't have done it without you. Those shifts you covered, being patient when I showed up half dead from exhaustion, believing I could do this when I wasn't sure myself. That's what friends do." Leon clinked his beer against James's. "So what's next? Big firm job, corporate law?" James had been waiting for this question, knowing his answer would surprise some people. "Actually, I accepted a position at Legal Aid Society of Chicago. Start in 2 months. Leon whistled low. "Legal aid doesn't pay much." "No, but it's why I did this. To help people who need it. To be the kind of lawyer who actually makes a difference in ordinary lives." James glanced at Victoria across the room, caught her eye, saw her smile with pride and support. I talked it over with Victoria. She reminded me that we're stable enough now that I can choose purpose over paycheck, at least for a while. "She's good for you." I wasn't sure at first. Thought maybe the wealth gap would be too much. But she's good for you. She sees you, you know? Really sees you. Yeah, I know. The party wound down eventually, guests trickling out with promises to stay in touch and congratulations, repeated until they started to lose meaning. Diana was last to leave, pausing at the door to pull James into a surprising hug. "Thank you for making her happy, for showing her what real partnership looks like. She's different now. Softer in the good ways, more willing to be vulnerable. That's because of you." "She's done the same for me," James replied honestly. "Taught me that accepting help doesn't make me weak, that letting someone in is brave instead of stupid. We saved each other, I think." After everyone left, after Noah had been put to bed with minimal protest and promises to discuss dog ownership more seriously, James and Victoria finally had a moment alone. They collapsed onto his worn couch together, exhausted and content in equal measure. "You were quiet during the party." Victoria's head rested on his shoulder, her hand finding his naturally. "What were you thinking about?" How different everything is. How 3 years ago I was terrified to even have dinner with you, convinced it would end badly." He shifted to look at her properly. "And now you're here, in my apartment after my graduation, part of my life in a way I never imagined possible. I was thinking about how wrong I was to be scared." "You weren't wrong to be scared. Fear made sense given everything you'd been through." She sat up enough to face him. "But I'm glad you tried anyway. Glad we both did." James had been carrying something in his pocket all day, waiting for the right moment. Now, in the quiet after-party stillness of his small apartment, it felt like time. "Can I ask you something?" "Always." "Do you remember that first night at the bar when you asked me out and I said no?" "Vividly. Most humiliating rejection of my life." But she was smiling, the old wound long healed. "You said I wouldn't last 5 minutes in your world. That was the bet you made with yourself. 5 minutes before I got bored or overwhelmed or proved you right about how these things end." He turned to face her fully, nervous in a way he hadn't been since their first real date. "How long has it been now?" She calculated quickly, understanding dawning. 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days, give or take. That's approximately 1.6 million minutes. He'd done the math obsessively, double-checking to make sure he was right. "Seems like I lasted a bit longer than 5 minutes. "Seems like?" Her voice had gone soft, uncertain where he was going with this. James reached into his pocket, pulling out the small box he'd been carrying since that night weeks ago when he'd decided, sitting alone after visiting his mother, that he was done being afraid of good things. It wasn't an expensive ring. He couldn't afford the kind of jewelry she was used to, even with his improved financial situation. But it was real, solid, chosen with care from a local jeweler who'd helped him find something meaningful within his budget. "Victoria, I love you. I've loved you since that night you showed up at the hospital and stayed because I needed you. Maybe before that, if I'm honest." He opened the bas, revealing the simple gold band with its modest diamond. "I know this isn't what you're used to. I know you could buy yourself a bigger ring without thinking about it. But this is what I can offer. A ring I chose myself, paid for with money I earned. A promise that I'll keep showing up, keep trying, keep loving you, even when it's hard. Will you marry me?" Victoria's eyes filled with tears, her hands shaking as she reached for the bond. "James, you don't have to." "Yes." She cut him off, laughing and crying simultaneously. "Yes, of course. Yes, you ridiculous, wonderful man. Did you really think I'd say anything else?" Relief flooded through him so intensely it was almost painful. He'd known logically that she'd probably say yes, but some part of him had still feared rejection, still worried he wasn't enough. He took the ring from her trembling fingers, sliding it onto her left hand. It fit perfectly. He'd stolen one of her other rings weeks ago to get the size right. The simple band somehow looked exactly right on her elegant hand, like it had always belonged there. "I love you," she said, kissing him with the kind of intensity that made words feel inadequate. "I love you, and I can't wait to marry you, to build a life with you officially instead of just in practice." They kissed until breathing became necessary, until the emotion of the moment needed to settle before it consumed them completely. "We should tell Noah in the morning," James said eventually. "He's going to lose his mind. He's going to demand we get that dog immediately." Victoria laughed, wiping tears from her cheeks. "Fair trade for a stepmom, he'll say." The word stepmom landed between them with unexpected weight. They'd been careful about labels, letting Noah set the pace, never forcing a relationship that needed to develop naturally. But somewhere over 3 years of movie nights and homework help, museum trips and bedtime stories, Victoria had become something more than Dad's girlfriend. "Is that okay?" James asked quietly. "That role? I know it's complicated with Kelsey existing somewhere out there, sending birthday cards twice a year and nothing else. I know you're not trying to replace her. I'm not replacing anyone. I'm just being here, being present, loving that kid because he's impossible not to love and because he's part of you. Victoria's voice was steady, certain. If he wants to call me stepmom eventually, that's his choice. If he wants to keep calling me Victoria forever, that's fine too. I'm not going anywhere either way. The public announcement of their engagement happened 2 days later, and the media response was exactly the circus James had feared. Headlines screamed variations on "Billionaire CEO engaged to legal aid lawyer," some calling it heartwarming, others questioning the pairing, tabloids hunting for scandal. James hated seeing his name in articles, hated the photos paparazzi took when he picked up Noah from school, hated strangers speculating about whether he was marrying up or she was slumming it. Victoria handled it with the practiced ease of someone who'd dealt with media scrutiny her entire adult life. But even she looked worn by the constant attention. "I'm sorry," she said one evening, after a particularly invasive article had published details about James's student loans and his mother's medical care. "I knew it would be bad, but I didn't think they'd dig into everything like this." "It's not your fault people are vultures." James was trying to be understanding, but anger leaked through. "I just hate that they're making our relationship into some kind of class warfare narrative, like you're rescuing me from poverty or I'm using you for money. Like we can't just be two people who love each other. We can update the privacy settings, limit what's public. That's not the point. The point is we shouldn't have to hide to have a normal life." They were standing in Victoria's penthouse. He'd started spending more nights there as their relationship deepened, though his apartment remained home base for Noah's stability. The floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over Chicago's skyline, the city glittering below them like scattered diamonds. Victoria moved to stand beside him, her hand finding his. "I know this is hard. I know the attention is invasive and unfair, but it'll die down eventually. There'll be some other scandal, some other story, and we'll fade into boring domesticity." "Will we, though?" James turned to face her. "You're Victoria Sinclair. You'll always be news, which means I'll always be the bartender who married the billionaire." His voice carried more bitterness than he'd intended, the words scraping out rough. "I don't want to be defined by our relationship. I don't want people looking at me and seeing your money instead of my accomplishments. I spent 3 years getting this degree, working myself half to death, and now articles about my graduation talk more about your net worth than my class rank." Victoria was quiet for a long moment, her jaw tight with something that might have been hurt or anger or both. "So what do you want me to do? Pretend I'm not wealthy? Hide what I've built? Make myself smaller so you're more comfortable? That's not fair. Isn't it, though?" Her voice rose slightly, controlled fury bleeding through. "You're upset that people see me as successful and you as my +1. But that's their problem, not ours. I know who you are. Brilliant, hard-working, principled. I know what you've accomplished. If other people can't see past the money, that's their limitation. Easy for you to say from the top of the mountain." The words came out sharper than he'd meant, and he watched them land like a slap. "You think this is easy?" Victoria's eyes flashed. "You think I don't know what people say? That I'm robbing the cradle with someone young enough to be my brother? That I'm having some kind of crisis? That you're obviously after my money? I hear it all, James. Every board meeting where someone makes a joke about my boy toy, every article speculating about prenups, every friend who warned me you'd break my heart when the novelty wore off. Then maybe we should wait." James heard himself say it, watched her face change. "Maybe we got engaged too fast, jumped into this before thinking through the implications." "Are you serious right now?" Victoria's voice dropped to something cold and dangerous. "We've been together 3 years. We've built a life together. I've helped raise your son. We're having a—" She stopped herself, the word baby dying unspoken. but it hung between them anyway. The pregnancy they'd been keeping private, waiting until the second trimester to share. The child growing inside her that would make their family permanent in ways a wedding never could. "We're having a baby," James finished quietly. "I know. Which is exactly why we need to think this through instead of rushing into marriage, because it's what we're supposed to do next." Victoria stared at him like he'd grown a second head. "You proposed to me 3 days ago. You got down on one knee in your apartment and asked me to marry you. And now you want to wait?" "I'm not saying never. I'm saying maybe we slow down. Let the media attention die. Figure out how to navigate our different worlds before we make it legal and permanent." "It's already permanent, you idiot." Tears were streaming down her face now, rage and hurt and disbelief mixing. "We're having a child together. That's as permanent as it gets." She pulled the ring off her finger, the simple gold band he'd chosen so carefully, and held it out to him. "Take it. If you're not sure, if you need time to think things through, then take it back." "Victoria!" "Take it." Her hand was shaking, but her voice was steel. "I won't wear an engagement ring from someone who's not sure they want to marry me." James didn't take the ring. Couldn't make his hand reach for it. Couldn't accept what taking it back would mean. "I do want to marry you. I'm just trying to protect..." "Protect what? Your pride? Your image? Or are you protecting yourself from being vulnerable enough to actually need me?" The accusation hit close enough to bone that he flinched. "Maybe all of it. Maybe I'm scared that marrying you means losing myself in your shadow. Maybe I'm terrified that our kid will grow up with everyone assuming their father is a kept man who got lucky. Then maybe you need to decide what matters more. What strangers think. Or us." Victoria pulled the ring off, set it on the table. "Because I can't marry someone who's ashamed of being with me." "Victoria, wait." "No. Leave, James. We both need space." She grabbed her coat from the chair, movements precise and controlled. "I need you to leave. I need space to think about whether this is something I want to keep fighting for." "Victoria, please. Leave, James, before I say something I can't take back." He stood there for a long moment, wanting to fix this, not knowing how. Finally, he picked up his own coat and walked to the door. At the threshold, he turned back. "I love you. That hasn't changed. Love isn't enough if you're too scared to actually choose it." Her voice was quiet now, exhausted. "My father used to say that love is a verb, not a feeling. It's what you do, not what you feel. And right now, you're choosing fear over me." James left without another word, the click of the door closing behind him sounding final in a way that made his chest ache. He drove home in a daze, let himself into the apartment where Noah was already asleep, and sat in the dark living room trying to understand how he'd just destroyed the best thing in his life. His phone buzzed with a text from Diana. "Victoria's a mess. Whatever you said, fix it." Then Leon. "Heard you and Victoria had a fight. You okay, man?" Then, worst of all, a missed call from Victoria's doctor's office with a voicemail reminding her about her 12-week appointment next Tuesday. 12 weeks pregnant. They were supposed to go to that appointment together, supposed to hear the heartbeat for the first time, supposed to start telling people they were going to be parents. Instead, he'd suggested they slow down. Wait. Think things through. Like their child was something that could be put on hold while he sorted out his ego. James dropped his head into his hands, the full weight of what he'd done finally crashing over him. He'd let fear, of judgment, of losing himself, of not being enough, poison something precious. He'd chosen pride over partnership, ego over love. Victoria had been right. Love was a verb, and he'd just failed to act on it in the moment it mattered most. His phone rang at 2 a.m. Meadowbrook Extended Care, His mother had taken a turn. Significant decline, confusion, agitation. Could he come? He was there in 15 minutes, finding Ellen thrashing in her bed, calling for people who'd been dead for decades, looking at him without the slightest recognition. "Ma'am, you need to calm down." The night nurse was trying to soothe her. "Your son is here now." "I don't have a son." Ellen's voice was pure panic. "Where's Robert? I need Robert." Robert had been James's father, the man who'd left 30 years ago. "Mom, it's me. It's James." He tried to take her hand, but she yanked it away. "Don't touch me. I don't know you. Where's my husband?" The nurse caught his eye, sympathy evident. "The pneumonia accelerated the decline. We're seeing rapid progression. I'm sorry." James stepped back, letting the staff handle his mother's agitation, and pulled out his phone. His fingers dialed Victoria's number before his brain caught up, muscle memory overriding pride. She answered on the second ring, voice thick with what might have been sleep or tears. "James? I'm at Meadowbrook. Mom's having an episode. She doesn't recognize me." His voice cracked. "She thinks I'm a stranger. She's calling for my father. I'm coming." No hesitation, no bringing up their fight. 20 minutes. "You don't have to." "I'm coming." She arrived in 15, hair pulled into a messy bun, wearing sweatpants and one of his old t-shirts she'd stolen months ago. No makeup, no polish, just Victoria showing up because he needed her. She found him in the hallway outside his mother's room, sitting on the floor with his head in his hands while the nurses worked to calm Ellen enough to sedate her. Victoria didn't say anything, just slid down the wall beside him and took his hand. They sat like that in silence while chaos happened behind the closed door. His mother's confused cries, the nurses' soothing voices, the eventual quiet when medication finally took effect. A doctor came out eventually, an older woman with kind eyes and the practiced empathy of someone who delivered bad news regularly. "She's resting now. But Mr. Carter, we need to talk about expectations." She sat across from them, professional distance carefully maintained. "The pneumonia caused significant damage. Combined with the progression of her disease, we're looking at weeks, possibly days, not months. I'm sorry." The words landed like physical blows, each one driving the air from his lungs. "But she was fine 3 days ago. At my graduation. She was lucid, happy. That's common with this disease. Moments of clarity before rapid decline. I'm very sorry, but you should prepare yourself and your family." After the doctor left, James sat frozen, unable to process what he'd just heard. His mother, stubborn, strong Ellen Carter, who'd worked 2 jobs and raised him alone and never once complained about the hand life dealt her, was dying. Actually dying, measured in days instead of years. "I'm not ready." The words came out broken. "I thought we had more time. I thought—" Victoria pulled him into her arms and he let himself break, let the tears come, let himself be held while grief crashed over him in waves. "I'm so sorry," she whispered into his hair. "I'm so sorry." They stayed until dawn, taking turns sitting with Ellen in case she woke lucid again. She didn't. The medication kept her deeply asleep, chest rising and falling with mechanical regularity. As morning light filtered through the windows, Victoria finally spoke about what had happened before. "What you said last night, about waiting to get married, did you mean it?" James was quiet for a long moment, watching his mother sleep, thinking about time and how it never waited for you to be ready. "No. I was scared and stupid, and I let other people's opinions matter more than us." He turned to face her. "I don't want to wait. I don't want to slow down. Oh, I want to marry you as soon as possible, before my mother—" His voice broke. "I want her to be there. Even if she doesn't understand what's happening, I want her there. James, I'm sorry for suggesting we wait, for caring what strangers think, for choosing pride over you." He took her hands, the engagement ring noticeably absent from her finger, though she'd slipped it into her pocket. He could see the outline against the fabric. You were right. Love is what you do, not what you feel. And I'm choosing you. Now. Always. If you'll still have me. Victoria pulled the ring from her pocket, holding it between them. Put it back on. Her voice was steady. And don't ever take it off again, no matter what anyone says. Deal? Deal. He slid the ring onto her finger where it belonged, and she kissed him like sealing a promise. We'll get married next month, Victoria said decisively. Small ceremony, just family and close friends, at the botanical gardens if the weather holds. Your mother will be there even if... She stopped, revised. She'll be there. They planned the wedding in 2 weeks, moving with the efficiency of people who understood time's value. Victoria called in favors, hired planners, arranged everything with the kind of focused intensity she usually reserved for corporate acquisitions. James took a leave from his new job before even starting. His supervisor at Legal Aid understood immediately when he explained about his mother. Family first, always. The work will be here when you're ready. Noah took the news about his grandmother with the stoic acceptance of a child who'd been prepared for this possibility, but still hoped it wouldn't come. Can I see her? He asked, before she's too gone. They visited every day, the three of them. Sometimes Ellen was agitated, sometimes catatonic, occasionally, rarely. She'd have moments where she seemed to recognize them, even if she couldn't form words. On one of those rare lucid moments, a week before the wedding, Ellen's eyes cleared while Victoria sat beside her bed. You're the one. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but certain. You're the one who loves my boys. Every day. Victoria took her hand carefully. I promise I'll take care of them. Good. Ellen's eyes drifted closed, a small smile on her face. Then I can rest. The wedding day arrived with October sunshine and air that smelled like autumn's last flowers. Chicago Botanic Garden had never looked more beautiful. Gold and amber leaves, late blooming roses, the kind of perfect fall afternoon that felt like a gift. They'd invited 80 people. James's number kept creeping up as he realized how many people had been part of his journey. Friends from law school, regulars from the bar, neighbors who'd helped with Noah, professors who'd believed in him. Victoria's list was shorter but no less meaningful. Diana, key board members who'd become genuine friends, the handful of people who'd known her before the money mattered. James stood at the altar in a suit that Victoria had insisted on buying. Let me do this one thing, please, watching the guests assemble. Noah stood beside him in a matching outfit, holding the rings with the gravity of someone given an important responsibility. You nervous, Dad? Terrified. That's how you know it's real. Noah delivered this with the wisdom of someone far older than 10. That's what you told me before my first baseball game. The music changed, and everyone stood. Victoria appeared at the end of the aisle, and James's breath caught. She'd chosen a simple dress, cream-colored, elegant without being ostentatious, and she'd never looked more beautiful. But it was what happened next that broke him completely. Behind Victoria, being wheeled down the aisle by a nurse from Meadowbrook, came Ellen Carter. She'd been in a semi-comatose state for 3 days, and the doctors had said moving her was risky. But Victoria had arranged everything: medical transport, equipment, staff. And there was his mother, dressed in her favorite blue dress, eyes half open and aware. As the wheelchair reached the front row, Ellen's gaze found James. Recognition flickered. Genuine, unmistakable recognition. Her hand rose slightly, trembling, and her mouth formed words that came out barely audible but clear. So proud of you, baby. James couldn't stop the tears. Didn't even try. He just mouthed, "I love you," while Noah grabbed his hand and squeezed. Victoria reached him, her own eyes bright with moisture, and took his hands in hers. The officiant began, but James barely heard the standard words. He was too focused on Victoria's face, on Noah standing proud beside them, on his mother in the front row having one last lucid moment to witness this. When it came time for vows, Victoria spoke first. "James, you taught me that power isn't about control or money or success. It's about showing up. For your son, for your mother, for me. Even when it's hard, even when you're scared, even when it would be easier to walk away. You taught me that family isn't about genetics or transactions. It's about choosing each other every single day." Her hand moved to her stomach, where their child grew, still secret to most, but present in every word. "You taught me that love is brave, that letting someone in doesn't make you weak. It makes you strong enough to carry what you couldn't carry alone." James had written his vows on paper, but the words seemed inadequate now. He pulled out the folded page, looked at it, then crumpled it, and spoke from his heart instead. "Victoria, the night we met, I was so scared of being hurt that I said no to the best thing that ever happened to me. You didn't let me stay scared. You pushed, you waited, you showed up, and you proved that some risks are worth taking." He glanced at Noah, then at his mother, then back to Victoria. "You taught me that accepting help isn't weakness. It's wisdom. That building a life with someone doesn't mean losing yourself. It means becoming more than you could be alone. You loved my son before you loved me, and that's when I knew you were real." His voice dropped to something softer, more intimate. "You're having my child, building a family with me, choosing this life, with all its complications and challenges, its modest budget and ordinary struggles, over the easier paths you could have taken. That's the greatest honor of my life." They exchanged rings, the same simple band he'd chosen now joined by a matching one for him. Noah handed them over with perfect solemnity, whispering, "Don't drop them," in a stage whisper that made everyone laugh. "By the power vested in me by the state of Illinois, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." James pulled Victoria close and kissed her while their friends and family applauded. Noah cheered loud enough for 3 people, and in the front row, Ellen Carter smiled, a real smile, clear and present and happy. The reception was held in the garden's event space, with catering Victoria had arranged and music James had chosen. They'd compromised on everything, finding middle ground between her resources and his comfort level, creating something that belonged to both of them. During the first dance, an old jazz standard neither could remember choosing but both loved, Victoria whispered in his ear, "Your mother's still lucid. She's been talking to the nurses." James looked over Victoria's shoulder to where Ellen sat, surrounded by staff, animated in a way she hadn't been in weeks. "How is that possible?" "I don't know, but let's not question it. Let's just be grateful." They danced until the song ended, then made their rounds to greet guests. Ellen held court from her wheelchair, telling anyone who'd listen about her son the lawyer, her grandson the genius, her new daughter-in-law who'd brought them all together. Late in the evening, as the party wound down and Noah started yawning, James knelt beside his mother's chair. "Thank you for being here, Mom, for fighting to be present for this." Ellen's hand came up to cup his cheek, and her eyes were clear in a way they hadn't been in months. "Wouldn't have missed it for the world, baby." Her voice was thin but certain. "You did good, better than good. You built something beautiful." She looked past him to where Victoria stood with Noah, the two of them laughing at something Leon had said. "She's going to take care of you when I can't anymore. And that baby—" Ellen's hand moved to James's, squeezing with surprising strength. "That baby is going to be so loved." You know about the baby? I'm dying, not deaf. A flash of her old humor sparked. Victoria told me weeks ago, wanted my blessing. And? I told her any child lucky enough to have you two as parents was blessed beyond measure. Ellen's eyes were drifting now, the clarity beginning to fade. Love them, James. Love them hard. Don't waste time being scared. I won't, Mom. I promise. She smiled, squeezed his hand once more, and her eyes closed. Not unconscious, just tired. The nurse checked her vitals, gave James a reassuring nod, and they wheeled her back to the medical van for transport to Meadowbrook. James watched the van pull away, Victoria's hand finding his. She'll sleep well tonight, Victoria said softly, knowing you're taken care of. The first few days of marriage passed in a blur of exhaustion and quiet joy. They moved James's essential belongings into Victoria's penthouse, a temporary arrangement until they found a house that felt like theirs rather than hers. Noah adapted with the resilience of children, claiming the guest room and immediately covering it with dinosaur posters. On the third morning, Victoria woke before dawn with her hand pressed to her stomach, an expression on her face that James had learned meant she was working up courage for something difficult. You okay? He propped himself up on one elbow, studying her in the gray pre-dawn light. There's something I need to tell you. She didn't look at him, still staring at the ceiling. Something I should have told you before the wedding, but I was scared of, I don't know, changing things. Making it about this instead of about us. Fear spiked through him. Victoria, whatever it is, I'm pregnant. The words came out in a rush. About 6 weeks. I found out 2 weeks ago, right after your graduation. I was going to tell you that night, but then everything happened with your mother, and then the fight, and then planning the wedding so fast, and I kept waiting for the right moment, and there wasn't one. James froze, his brain struggling to process words that rearranged his entire future. Pregnant. 6 weeks. A baby. Their baby. Say something, Victoria whispered, and only then did he realize she'd turned to face him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Please say something. Please say. You're pregnant. He said it like he was testing the words, seeing how they felt in his mouth. Then again, with dawning wonder. You're pregnant. I know it's fast. I know we just got married and your mother just died and you're starting a new job and this is terrible timing. He kissed her, cutting off the spiral of anxiety with his mouth on hers, his hand moving to cover her stomach through the thin fabric of her sleep shirt. Terrible timing, he repeated when they broke apart, his voice rough with emotion. Victoria, this is... He couldn't find words big enough. This is everything. She let out a breath that might have been a laugh or a sob. Really? Really? He kept his hand on her stomach, marveling at the knowledge that their child was growing there, smaller than his thumb, already real. Noah's going to lose his mind. He's been asking for a sibling since he was 5. Your mother knew, Victoria's voice caught. I told her the week before the wedding. I wanted her blessing. She said any child lucky enough to have us as parents would be blessed beyond measure. The words hit him like a physical blow. His mother had known, had carried that knowledge to her death, had smiled at his wedding knowing her grandchild was already on the way. She died happy then. His throat was tight, tears he'd been holding back for days finally breaking free. She died knowing our family was growing, that we'd be okay. They held each other as dawn broke over Chicago, the city waking below them, their future rewriting itself around this tiny, impossible fact. A baby. Ellen Grace, though they didn't know it yet. The child who would have her grandmother's stubborn chin and her father's kind eyes and her mother's fierce determination. Later that morning, they told Noah over pancakes. His reaction was everything James had hoped for. Pure, uncomplicated joy. I'm going to be a big brother? Noah's eyes were huge. Like an actual big brother with a real baby? A real baby, Victoria confirmed, smiling. In about 7.5 months. That's so cool. Noah was already calculating. I can teach them about dinosaurs, and baseball, and how to tie their shoes. Dad, this is the best thing ever. He launched himself at both of them, hugging them with the fierce enthusiasm of a 10-year-old who'd just gotten his greatest wish. Over his head, James met Victoria's eyes, and in that look passed everything they didn't need to say out loud. They'd built this, against all odds, against all logic, against every reason it shouldn't have worked. They'd built a family. 6 days later, Ellen Carter passed away peacefully in her sleep. But she died knowing. She died with the knowledge that her son had found love, that her grandson would have a sibling, that the family she'd sacrificed everything to build would continue growing long after she was gone. It was enough. Ellen Carter passed away 6 days later, peacefully in her sleep. James was with her, holding her hand, Noah on his other side doing homework because his grandmother had always loved watching him study. She didn't wake before the end, didn't have any final words or dramatic goodbyes. She simply stopped breathing between one moment and the next, so quietly that James almost didn't notice. "Dad?" Noah's voice was small. "Is she—" "Yeah, buddy. She's gone." They sat with her for a while, neither ready to let the nurses come, to make it official. Eventually, Victoria arrived. She'd been giving them space but staying close, and gently suggested they say their final goodbyes. The funeral was small and beautiful. James spoke about a woman who'd sacrificed everything for her son, who'd taught him that love meant showing up even when exhausted, who'd worked 2 jobs without complaint and never once made him feel like a burden. Noah read a letter he'd written to his grandmother, thanking her for teaching him about constellations and baking cookies and always believing he could do anything. Victoria didn't speak publicly, but she'd arranged everything: the service, the flowers, the reception afterward. She'd known Ellen for 3 years, but she'd honored her like family. They buried Ellen Carter on a Thursday afternoon in October, under trees turning gold and red. James threw the first handful of dirt onto the casket, then stepped back and let Victoria hold him while he cried. Life moved forward the way it always does after loss, not forgetting, but learning to carry the weight differently. James started at legal aid the Monday after the funeral, throwing himself into the work his mother had sacrificed for him to do. Victoria stepped back from Sinclair Industries' daily operations, handing the CEO role to Diana and focusing on building the Ellen Carter Foundation. They funded health care for working families, nurses who sat with confused patients, medications that kept people comfortable, the small dignities that had made his mother's last years bearable. 4 months after the wedding, on a snowy January morning that felt impossible in its ordinariness, Ellen Grace Carter Sinclair arrived, 7 pounds 3 ounces, with her father's dark hair and her grandmother's stubborn chin. When Noah held her for the first time, tears streaming down his face, James saw 3 generations of love passing forward. "She looks like Grandma," Noah whispered, 10 years old and suddenly so much older. "She does," Victoria agreed, exhausted and radiant. "Strong, like her namesake." The years accumulated in the way time does when you're not watching. Noah grew into a thoughtful teenager who traded dinosaurs for climate science. Ellie became the kind of toddler who refused "because I said so" as an answer, demanding logical explanations with her mother's intensity and her father's stubborn principles. James won cases that kept families together. Victoria proved you could be powerful and present. They adopted the golden retriever Noah had lobbied for, bought a house that was neither too big nor too small, built a life that looked nothing like either of them had imagined and better than both had hoped. On their 5th anniversary, they returned to the Anchor Bar. The new owner had kept the lighthouse sign. It still flickered, still honest in its imperfect neon glow. They sat at the same stools where everything had begun, ordered whiskey from a bartender who didn't know their story. "Remember when I bet you'd last 5 minutes?" Victoria raised her glass, smiling. "Dumbest bet you ever made." best loss I ever took." She clinked her glass against his. "To 5 million more minutes?" "To forever," James said simply, and meant it. Through the window, snow fell soft and steady, the first of the season. Around them, the bar hummed with late-night energy, different people having different conversations, the essential rhythm unchanged. Victoria's hand found his across the bar, her engagement ring catching the amber light. The simple band he'd chosen with careful hope 5 years ago, now joined by a wedding band and the weight of everything they'd built. 5 minutes had become forever. The bet had been lost before it began. And sitting in that dive bar with honest whiskey and the woman who'd refused to take no for an answer, James Carter understood what his mother had always known. The biggest risks were always worth taking, and enough, this life, this love, this family, was exactly what they had.